Welcome to Chats with David and Morris. We are pleased and honored to welcome as our guest Professor Ed Jones, who will be our guest speaker. And Ed, I'd like to begin by asking you to start your journey back in Morgantown where you grew up and share with us, if you would, your memories of some of your childhood adventures, including family, high school, and we'd like to know how you happened to win the Golden Horseshoe Award in 1948.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. My father spent his entire professional career at West Virginia University, 75 years from being a freshman to passing away. My mother grew up in Pennsylvania, and she was, I think, the first person in her side of the family to complete a four-year college degree. She graduated from Cornell University in 1925. Sadly, she died quite young. My father, when I had two sisters, one of whom did not survive childhood, and then my other sister was also in the academic world. She was at Northern Virginia Community College in suburban Washington. I was born in 1934, so I was young at the time of World War II, but I remember hearing bits and pieces of it. And it affected our life because for a while in there I lived with my grandmother right beside a railroad track in central West Virginia. And I remember talking to the soldiers on the train because there was a sidetrack there. We would go out and talk to the soldiers and they'd toss us candy. In the 18th century, George Washington led a group of surveyors to do the surveying west of the mountains, Allegheny Mountains, including what is now West Virginia. And he gave all of the men who were in his surveying party little golden horseshoes. And as a memory of that, the state of West Virginia has a golden horseshoe requirement or program by which every kid in the state has to take 4 years of history, geography, government, and so on of the state. And then at the end of this, they give a test, and from each of the 55 counties, there are 4 people who earn golden horseshoes, and I happen to have been one of those. But I've always been interested in history, and that, I think, is probably the reason.
Ed, do you have any memories of the Great Depression on Morgantown?
No, well, I remember hearing about it. I remember hearing Dad say that his salary was, as a college professor, which was pretty low, was cut in half. I remember gas rationing. We saved Dad saved the rationing stamps so that he could visit his ailing mother once a month. It was a 150-mile round trip drive. So I spent quite a bit of time with her and as a little kid. So it's one of the memories I have of the gas rationing, which is more the war, I guess, than the Depression. Just a little too young for the real Depression.
Do you have any recollection of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal any programs in Morgantown that affected the city?
Yes, and there was a town east of Morgantown, about 10 or 12 miles, called Arthurdale, which was one of their settlement houses. We were aware of it. I didn't have a lot to do with it because it was in a different school district. So that I was aware of it, but that's about it.
You remember the WPA?
Slightly, yes. Not much. There were not any immediate projects where I lived.
And of course, the critics call the WPA We Piddle Around, if you recall.
Well, it was We Poke Along around there, but neither of which was very complimentary. They did some good work. In fact, I guess I do, when I think about it, they did do some work in parks, and you found out later that that's what had been done. You didn't find out at the time.
Right. Now, you went to West Virginia University and earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, is that correct?
That's correct, 1955.
And then, what motivated you to go to the school in London?
Well, a friend of my father's suggested to Dad that he invite me down to his office. He ran the local dairy. They were good friends. And Rotary had recently established an international fellowship program, and he suggested I should apply. And of course, my under-the-cover response was, who, me? But I did, and I got it. So in the summer, let's see, early September, I guess it was, of 1955, I was on the Queen Mary, going to London, and I spent a year at the Imperial College of Science and Technology in London, which at that time was considered the best or the second best engineering program in all of Europe. And I got along well. I was in a group of students, there were 10 of us, from 10 different countries.
Wow.
And so I learned a lot, both about electrical engineering and also just how the world works.
Were you ever able to apply any of the learning when you got back to the States from what you earned there in London?
Well, I think with my father having been a college professor when I was growing up, no way in the world was I going to go to be a teacher. I think it showed me that I wanted to be. So I came back. I had 2 years in the U.S. Army, mostly in Japan. And then I came back and earned a PhD at the University of Illinois. And I spent my professional career then primarily at University of Illinois, and then 35 years at Iowa State University, where I'm now a professor emeritus.
Now, military service, you spent in Misawa, Japan. Did you know one of the residents here also was stationed in Misawa?
No.
He was in the control tower and said that he remembered seeing Russian aircraft taking off from their airport. But why was a second lieutenant, no, I mean, you were first lieutenant, why were you stationed at an Air Force base?
Well, I was in the Army doing Army Signal Corps work, which we still can't talk very much about.
Security clearance.
Yes. And I was 400 miles north of Tokyo, so I wasn't very far from you know where.
That's how. Your experience at the getting your PhD at the University of Illinois. Why did you choose Illinois over any other university?
Well, a number of reasons. I think probably I was admitted, I applied to 3 different schools and was admitted to all 3. I think the turning point was a letter from the department head. By this time I knew that I wanted to try to become a college professor, and he wrote a letter saying how he thought Illinois was the best place for me to be. I think I still have that letter, I'm not sure. But I think that was the tipping point. You know, my dad had also done his master's degree. He did not have a PhD. And he was also at Illinois. His major professor was the man who invented sound motion pictures. A Russian man named James T. Tekachina.
You know, you worked in the private sector at Westinghouse and General Electric.
Yes.
You made a decision, though, to go to the public sector, that is, first with the University of Illinois, and then later Iowa State. What motivated that?
Well, the people. The people that I had, the head of the department at Illinois, and Ed Jordan, was an outstanding engineer, an outstanding administrator, a very good leader, and it was a good chance to work with him. And the man then I was offered a job at Iowa State University, which had some promotion and so on with it. And then another book writer, teacher, civic leader, professional person. Looked like a very good place to work and live. Ames is a tremendous town to live in, still is. And it was a good training. It was actually at one time one of the 3 universities in the country, one of the list of universities for which college professors had come as students. And it was one of the top ones in the country in that respect.
Once you got to Iowa State, where were your areas of research and where did you publish?
Okay. I did some, most of my research was really in applying some of the modern things that were happening in engineering education to improve, do research. And engineering education underwent a tremendous change in the middle 50s. And that led to lots of changes that had to be made throughout the curriculum, teaching methods, content, evaluation, also such things as working with international students, getting more women into the programs, still a tough job. And so I was working primarily in those and in service kinds of activities. I served on about 65 accreditation teams over a 40-year period. And that was, and I never, when you're doing accreditation visits, you don't go back to the same university a second time. And these are in about 15 different countries. So I got, again, more benefit from my international experiences. So I published, I edited journals, I was on accreditation teams, I chaired accreditation teams, and I edited a journal in engineering education, was on an advisory board for another one. So that was basically really trying to do a little better job of teaching.
What would earn someone a promotion and tenure at Iowa State?
Well, at that time, and still, teaching is important. Researchers getting out and getting known and getting recognition and making contributions. They were very broadly evaluated, but you had to show some significance. Somehow or another they found it. I don't know where they looked, but.
You've heard the phrase, though, publish or perish. Was that applicable to Iowa State? Publish or perish?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Publish, if you take that word a little bit broadly. I did a lot of conference papers, which are different from the others. Although they're mostly referee conferences. I edited journals. I counted them up here some time ago, and I forget the number, but I had more than I thought I did. So, yeah, you had to do things beyond the classroom. If that's all you did, you could be a permanent associate professor. But other than that, you had to do more than teach, and it had to be significant.
Now, you were advisors to a number of Mid-East countries. Did you travel to all those?
Yes, I have been in 9 or 10 Middle Eastern countries. I've worked in all of the Gulf states, also some in Europe, in the Levant, and some in South America, Central and South America. So I was very fortunate in that respect.
Where'd little Morris go? Little Morris, hello, come back out. Here he comes. Hello, star of the show.
This is going to be part of it. Put him back up in the chair and I'll hold on to him.
It's okay, don't go
wrong. Ed, you probably remember in February, the great snowstorm that hit Texas and the failure of the grid system there. What was your analysis of that failure, and how do you think Texas could improve or correct that?
Well, the professional papers, and I still read a few of them, have not yet come out to give a long-range analysis, so I can only guess at what some of the things I've heard on TV and radio. But I think anytime you're building something, you have a lot of different tensions: cost, reliability, safety, and so on. And they probably depended on the weather reports that they've known in the last 100 years and didn't see any likelihood of something like that coming. And there was a river in Ames, which they designed for 100-year floods. Well, if you got that is a flood that had historically only happened once every 100 years. And they would design with that was one of their criteria. My guess is, and it's only a guess, is that they did not expect as severe a storm as they got. And they had saved some money so they can keep the electric bills down.
So they did not prioritize the infrastructure and anticipate, say, this kind of storm.
I think that's probably the word anticipate. I think is it's a rational decision, but it turns out to be a mistake. And we had another example of a mistake in the Suez Canal just quite recently. And it's a mistake in hindsight.
With vision sharpened 2020. Let's shift gears and come to your family. Share with us, please, Ed, when and where you met your wife, Ruth.
Well, I met Ruth when I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois. We met at the Wesley Foundation, and she was a music student, was finishing, I think, a junior in music, and then that was 1958. And we were married in 1960. And so that's...
Children?
And we have that's more than 60 years we've been married. We have 3 children. Our son, Charles, is an attorney in Minneapolis and is doing quite well. He and his wife, Therese, have 2 internationally adopted children from Colombia in South America, and they're great kids. Then the surprise of our life was in 1964 when my wife gave birth to identical twin girls, and we did not know that we were going to have twins. So, I mean, nothing will top that for a surprise.
And grandchildren.
And one of them is married to a computer engineer who worked at Microsoft, is now actually retired of all things. And the other one has 2 children adopted from Colombia. So 4 of our 5 grandchildren are adopted from Bogota. And they're great kids.
Neat.
And when and why did you decide to come to Stillwater?
Children and grandchildren.
Children and grandchildren.
They were all in the area.
And then how about Boutwell? When did you decide to come out?
That was in about 15, 16 years ago. And the kids said, well, go have a look at it. And that was it.
Now, you've served on the Archives Committee here for a long number of years. We talked earlier about the number of videography that you have done with the residents. Could you talk about that, and what satisfaction do you get from these interviews and taping them?
Okay. Well, this was a program that started long before we came, and I think Cliff Japs was the first one. He talked about having come through World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, as I remember it. And his presentation was, I suspect around 1972, along in there someplace. And he talked about his experiences during World War II, and somebody had taped it. So they put it on a DVD, and that's number 1. And the last one before the epidemic of COVID hit was number 119. And Cliff Japs and David here and Wayne Leisman and Ray Hunter and quite a few others, Marilyn Chapman, Mary, and I'm sure I'm leaving out some people. And we did quite a bit of editing on them to get the rough spots out and showing those. They're still being shown on part of the programs on, I think it's Tuesday afternoons. They're varying lengths. The longest one's 2.5 hours.
Who is that?
Cliff,
George Brill.
George Brill. Some cases we've done it with husband and wife together. Others it's been individuals. It's just what the people want, what they like to do. Some of them talk a lot. Mine's about 30 minutes, that's long enough.
How do you think it's benefited the people here knowing that now they have something historical that they can refer to, or mostly probably their grandchildren can come and look at this?
Yes, my guess is that with a little luck, I think I've given copies of our tapes to our grandchildren, or maybe I just gave them to the kids, but enough for the grandchildren. I guess that's probably what I did. And I suspect that there are people who live here to see them on the local network and are inclined to be interested in seeing what their grandchildren have done. I don't know how many other, I don't know if your grandchildren would be interested in seeing what our grandchildren, what I did, possibly. I just don't know. But,
Final thoughts and philosophy of life, Ed?
well, try to do things that people find useful, do it well. I've been very fortunate in a number of respects. Most respects. I've had some health issues over the years, but I've been very fortunate in outstanding set of parents, grandparents and family members, colleagues, probably a good bit of luck along the way.
You have some photos there. Could you share those also?
Yes, I could.
27.
Okay. This is a picture of my mother who...
Oh. I see the resemblance.
She's the one.
Hold anything.
Well, and here's my father with a copy of a book that he wrote at age 87, a history of engineering at West Virginia University.
Wow.
There's a picture of my wife and I. You can guess what's going on there.
Cute.
What part of the wedding?
Very cute.
Another picture of my dad. He was a handyman. With a beautiful workshop.
Nice, I'll say. Nice shop, yeah.
Here's an interesting picture, which engineering has an honor society called Tau Beta Pi, which I was a member of, as was my father. And they requested pictures of what do you all look like now? So I made this composite of my father and me. And it turns out, I guess we look quite a bit alike, which this really showed that in a way that I had never thought of before. He's no longer living, of course. And this thing in the center is the symbol of Tau Beta Pi.
Hey, lovely.
This was a nice award that I got about a year ago. The new department, the Department of Electrical Engineering at Ames came up with an idea of having what they called a Hall of Fame, which featured faculty members or former faculty members or former students and so on.
Wow.
And I happen to have been chosen for that.
Got half a minute.
Okay. And here's our family
Oh,
at our son's graduation from law school at the University of Minnesota
wow.
in about 1991.
Cool.
And here's my great-grandfather, who was an officer of this Union Army in the Civil War.
Wow.
So that picture's well over 100 years old. And since you mentioned golden horseshoes, there I am getting knighted by the superintendent of schools of the state of West Virginia.
Oh, that's really neat.
So that's an old picture.
You probably need to wrap it up.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Okay, well, thank you all.